All right, Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Welcome to the Great Rally Books Day on a beautiful summer evening, morning, middle of the night, wherever we're at. Um, so this is our fourth week of looking at the spiritual realm, our third week in We Agnostics, and perhaps we might close it out tonight, but I don't know. But we talked a lot about deep stuff, and if you really summarize, you know, the We Agnostics, you get the powerful words agnostic and atheist. This agnostic is someone that's just unsure. They want proof, and the atheist rejects ideas. And then you have the believer, the theist, and you also have the Gnostic, the one who knows. And but the information from this chapter is it's such a shift in the book. It shifts away from the dark glooming of alcoholism to talking about that there's a power deep down within us. That's where we find the power. How we find the power is 49. I mean, look at the combination, look at the recipe that was so freely given to us. And with God being within, that's why the stuffs are not about gaining anything. They're never about gaining anything. They're about losing stuff so we can be closer to God. Get rid of all this stuff we've held onto our whole life, beliefs, everything. I mean, inventory is a beautiful process. And, you know, the spirit has been within us since the day we're born. And this is a God program. As much as people want to downplay it, and God's mentioned over 200 times in this book, and you know, we can choose our own conception of God, no matter how limited. No matter how limited. Last week we talked about visual proof being the weakest proof, and tonight we're going to get into a shift a little bit backwards into our thinking and the bedevilments, but we're going to look at some cool stuff, and so we're going to talk a whole lot more about God. So. All right, we're on page 51. All right, my glasses keep stuffy in my house. My glasses keep getting, there it goes again, clear. Um, Page 51. This world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than all the millenniums which went before. So this is written 37-ish. So you do your research and now look at 80 plus years later, how much progress has been made. We'll get more into that. Almost everyone knows that the reason. Students of ancient history tell us the intellectual men of those days was equally as best as today. Yet the ancient times material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. And the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered, that means chained or tied up by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas, closed-mindedness. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth was preposterous. Others came near putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies, astronomical. So when Columbus came to America in 1492, not all that long ago, there's a theory the earth was flat. Some people still talk about that. But what happened is there was a theory. It was a theory. It was no proof or anything. And no one had experienced it. And they thought that you would, you can't go that far out to sea because you'll fall off the edge. And now they say that was the world, the people in the world actually knew it wasn't flat, but that's the way they would keep you to where so you wouldn't travel out of your continents and stuff, keep you trapped. But so the story, they go off the edge, and when they didn't fall off the edge and they saw the boats were kind of going like this, all of a sudden, whoa, wait a minute, you know, they couldn't see, the entire ship. All they could see was, the roundness of the earth. And let's see what else it says here. We ask ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as we are the ancients about the realm of the material? Even in present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight of Kitty Hawk. So Orville and Wilbur Wright were the first, as we know, to fly a plane, and they were not scientists. They weren't scholars or inventors. They were bicycle mechanics. Yet they're the greatest aviation pioneers, and they completely changed the world. You know, look, says, had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Longley's flying machine, which was supposed to be the greatest thing ever, and they, built it up, go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proven man could never fly? Had not people said that God had reserved this privilege to the birds? So, the Wright brothers, here's the thing. They believed they could fly, right? They believed it. They made a decision, they took action. They took the plane out and they crashed it. They rebuilt another and crashed it. They rebuilt another and crashed it. I think it was like 11 until they started getting it somewhat right. But they crashed it over and over again. They didn't stop until they could fly. It was no longer belief they could fly. They knew flying because they experienced it. And people tried, flight before, but it always failed. I could mention Longley. But they put emphasis on engines and powerfulness and just all sorts of things. And some of them even blew up when they went to fly. The Wright brothers focused on a method of pilot control as the key to flying, a method that everyone else thought they were insane. But where did they get that idea? From bicycles. And people joked about their flying. The mathematicians laughed at them because they proved man could never fly. Scientists wrote essays how it could never happen. And then the preachers would preach that God did not, like a book said, God did not intend man to fly. There's if the guy had wrote, and if God intended man to fly, he would have given us wings. But no one believed it could happen, not even the greatest minds. And the ones who thought it might, they would never mention that. And when they flew, those mathematicians were out of jobs. They were laughed at, fired from their professors at their colleges. Scientists completely had to reevaluate lifelong work and completely lost their credibility and also their jobs. And preachers, there's a famous story of a preacher weeks before had got in front of his church, not far from when the Wright brothers flew, and said, man can never fly, blah, blah, blah. And he had a full house. When they flew, like 8 people showed up to his sermon. These preachers that all preached lost their followers. The headline of a French newspaper said flyers and liars, or flyers or liars, I'm sorry, believing the Wright brothers had not even flown. But something interesting happened was in 1908, 5 years after they had their flight, the Wright brothers went to France. And it was very expensive. They had to load up a bunch of stuff on a boat and go over there, and they flew in front of those, which the French supposedly had the greatest scientists in the world. And after those scientists witnessed the flight, public admitted they had done wrong and done them injustice. Their careers were over, completely over, and it changed science. And the writers of the article were fired from the newspaper and banished. And the newspaper even closed. So these 2 crazy bicycle mechanics refused to give up their dream. They turned their belief in the knowing and turned the world upside down. So, I mean, the way I look at it, if you believe in something but fail, is it really a failure? If you try something, there is no such thing as failure, because why? You got a result. It's simple. Keep trying over and over again. And, perhaps you need to change what you believe a little bit. Perhaps you need to change the way you approached it, and you'll get it right. And that's exactly what they did. With each mistake, they changed their beliefs until they flew. Repetition, repetition. Let's go back to the book. Only 30 years later, the conquest of air was almost an old story. This is 1937-ish, right? And airplane travel was in full swing. So it's almost like people forgot, almost like it didn't exist. But most fields, our generation, have witnessed complete liberation of their thinking. Show any longshoreman on a Sunday supplement describing a proposal to explore the moon by means of a rocket, and he will say, "I bet they do it." Maybe not long either. Again, the book's written 37-ish, published in 39, in 36 years after the Wright brothers' flight. By then, flight was old news, like you said. The first commercial flight was in 1914 from Oakland to San Francisco, which is only a 10-minute drive, 15-minute drive, but they flew. That was the first commercial flight. Is a perfect example from belief to knowledge. You had two guys believe they could do it, and overnight they did the impossible. All that was crushed, and everyone knew we could go into space. In 1957, the Russians went into space. In 1969, we landed on the moon. And 30 years before that, in this book, it's talking about people going to the moon. 30 years before it ever happened. It's crazy. This book is written by driven people. And I guarantee all the people that, like these Wright brothers, they're all driven people. It's not, back to the book, is not our age characterized by the ease but with which we discard old ideas for new, by complete readiness by which we throw away the theory or gadget which does not work for something new which does? I mean, look how fast does technology fly today? You go buy a computer, you walk out the door, it's already outdated, right? The next big thing last year is in the garbage can. You don't see too many people walking around with iPhones 4 or 7. Sometimes even 11. They want iPhone, whatever we're at, 16 or whatever, 15. They line up to get it. And when we see the better gadget, we look at ours, goes, oh, look at the size of that phone. You think about the inventions that changed the world. Think about it. Stuff that you couldn't imagine being without. I mean, years and years ago, electricity, you had the light bulb, you had the radio, you had the car, you had the train, you had the airplane, printing press, the battery, refrigerator, the electric printing press, I would say, refrigerator, TV, camera, phone, can go on and on. Look at the medical, antibiotics, anesthesia, microscope, x-ray, right? Think about all that, MRI. And more recent, last 30 years, we have think how much the computers changed the world. How about the email, the internet, texting, all that stuff? And what would happen if all the cell phones went off all of a sudden? You would see more confusion than anything in the world. Look at Steve Jobs. As far back as the 90s, he had a vision of a device that would have a phone, camera, TV, computer, email, all that stuff in it to connect to the internet. And his workers thought he was crazy. Matter of fact, the story is when he showed them what they brought him was the iPad, and he says, "Can you make this into a phone?" And that's how it happened. But he had a vision and he never gave up on it. He knew it would change the world. So when the iPhone came out, what was popular at that time? The flip phone, or what was the phone we all were saving money for? Was the BlackBerry? You don't see those around anymore. And when the iPhone came out, those are gone. It's impossible to imagine a world without those devices. And don't forget the theories that we've had that were proven wrong, completely changed the world. The belief that the sun rotates around the earth, that theory was proven in the 1500s. There's a germ theory that diseases were caused by bad air. That's disproven in the 1800s. The belief that the continents could not move, that was proven in the 1900s. And there was, more recent ones, like I was just mentioned this only the other day about how ulcers were caused by stress in the 80s. That was disproven. When those old ideas were debunked, you know, the old ideas no longer were used. People laughed at them. Think about that. When you look at back at just the last few hundred years of the inventions, we laughed at, you know, we laughed at the car from 100 years ago, or the TVs from the 90s that you had to, remember those TVs we had to move that weighed 150 pounds? You know, things that you know, they're no longer around. The old TVs from the 70s and the big, you know, the ones that no one could steal, you know. But yet, think of all the stuff that's gone. Typewriters, payphones, pagers, real recorders, rotary phones, um, transistor radios, pocket radios, Walkmans. We kind of have those, but you know, film cameras, videotapes, VCR, boombox. I have a boombox actually, but overhead projectors, dial-up phones, internet, you know, the dial-up internet connection, you know, dot printers, all that stuff. Even, you know, the first iPhone was laughed at because it was so small. People look at it now. So when the light bulb was invented, within 10 years, kerosene lamps were gone. No, you know, tossed out without question because there was no use for them. When the refrigerator, you know, came out, no one was buying ice boxes. Now, here's a $1 million question, and it's the book's going to say it. We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. How come when we have continual problems, we cannot change our viewpoint or toss it aside like we do effortlessly, like we do these gadgets? They no longer work for us. It's because we're driven by things like pride, self-esteem, security, sex instincts. We're driven by mystic instincts, and we choose to follow that rather than intuition. You know, I knew I needed to change my thinking and get rid of the things that no longer work for me, that tore me apart every day, that made me stay up all night, sick to my stomach. But when I thought about change, I thought, nope, I can't do that. Not possible. So let's see what we needed to change. And you're going to recognize, and we're going to cover this again 2 or 3 more times, this paragraph. But you'll see the opposites, the 10 step, nice step promises in here. I'm not going to point them out. You can sign them. That we're having trouble with personal relationships. Who doesn't? Who didn't? You know, perhaps that's why maybe personal relations is on step 4. How many personal relations do you struggle with right now, this second? Who's on your list? Your grandma list. You're on my list. That type of thing. You know, humans struggle with personal relations, and that is perhaps why we need to be spiritual, create spiritual relations with people, with others. And that's why, you know, think about that, you know, add it to your nightly meditation. What's the difference between spiritual relations and personal relations? And you'll see one word comes into that: kindness, right? That we couldn't control our emotional natures. Can you control your emotional natures, or do they control you? When is emotional security on a resentment not affected, or fear, or harm? If I'm unaware of my emotions, they will always control me. And our security must be grounded in the power greater than ourselves. And why? Because we look for security out here in the gadgets and the person and other people. Where's our security? Inside. That's why the steps are about losing stuff, so I can get closer to that. We're prey to misery and depression. Another word for prey is victim. We are a victim to misery and depression. And a wise man told me years ago, there's no recovery in being a victim. Ever. 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 It's a death sentence. We need to have a power greater than ourselves. You know, I was hearing a footstep one time, and I was out in the middle of this field, and this field mouse came out of a hole, and it didn't see us, and so he kind of like cruised around and looked cool, and then a hawk flew over, and it ran back in the hole, and the hawk was long gone. But the rest of the day, when that field mouse came out, It was prey to misery and depression. It ran when the hawk wasn't even there. How many times have you felt like that field mouse? Right? Look what it says next. We couldn't make a living. It's a question I mentioned. Are you living life? Or are you being lived? We'll get back into that. But not being able to live life you want to live greatly affects your self-esteem. I'm not good enough. This job isn't paying enough. I feel like crap, low self-esteem, high self-esteem. I'm better than everybody here. What they're saying here is we're not living life. We had a feeling of uselessness. Why? Because of low self-esteem. Not good enough. And we wind up resenting ourselves and creating self-pity. Have you ever had a feeling of usefulness? Who are you useful to? Someone asked me that question years ago, and I said, the people I sold drugs to, I guess. That's the best I could say. He said, asked me in rehab. Some guy read these out to us and blew my mind. We were full of fear. So full of fear is what that word is at the end of the fourth step where it says frightened. The same as full of fear. It's the state of living in fear. Remember what Roosevelt said, the greatest fear is fear itself. We're all, full of fear because we're at times because we're motivated by these instincts. And do you struggle with fear? Do you need to be fearless? That's what happens. And that means it doesn't mean no fear. It means learn to face them. We're unhappy. All we ever have done in some form or another is look for happiness, maybe even in the bottle. And we pray for it. But the problem is we're looking for out here. When we run out of places to look for happiness, we discover it's been where it's been the whole time within us. I heard a guy say one time, when joy takes over you and it's something that surprises you see, or you emotions. What if you could tap into that, have it just be in that state? We couldn't seem to be a real help to other people. That's because we were selfish and self-centered. That's concerned only with my own wants and needs, with little or no concern for others' wants and needs. But when you awaken, you come to this form that, of called other-centered, and you shift from what happens, you shift, you become what's called selflessness, concerned for the wants and needs of others, with little to no concern of my own wants and needs. God first, others second, my needs get met. But it's then we discover that being help to other people is giving freely yourself without comprehension of anything in return. I always wanted something out of it. This girl would ask me to move, and I would think, oh, she's cute. So, yeah, I'll say nice to her. Or some guy, wants me to help him. Oh, he's got dope. Or this guy, oh, he likes to spend it. There's always something I needed from it. I always wanted something in return. The question is, who have you helped? And, I always tell my sponsorees, make a list of people you've helped in the past few weeks or months. Hold on to it. Look at it and compare it to the past. You can't compare it because you cannot make that list. I can make a list of people, who said, don't come back here no more. Don't come around here no more. The people that said, they changed the locks on the house, or they see the little curtains open up and the lights will go off. I can make a list of those people. 25 years ago, it was impossible for me to make a shift from selfish to selfless because what I'm aware of, I can control, but what I'm aware of always control me. Today, I'm blessed with abundance because I'm aware of what causes my pain because of this fourth step. I know my instincts. They no longer blind me. Do you see why we look for stuff outside ourselves in the hopes to be happier? I need to meet the right person. I need to control my anger. I need to be the right job. I need the right purpose. I just want to be stronger, want to be happy. That's not spiritual, because if we could do that, why would we need God? Stop seeking for answers where answers can't be found. fact, the book was not a basic solution to these bedevilments more important than whether we should see new reels of lunar flight? Of course it was. I mean, sitting on my butt saying, I'll fix this tomorrow with a bong in my hand, I guess you would say, well, my world is falling apart. That's the way life was. Bedevilment means to torment maliciously. That where I bring doubt, skepticism, and confusion to everything. That's what I did. So these bedevilments sum up the life of the active alcoholic, but more importantly, the dry alcoholic. What's the difference between the two? The active alcoholic's not going to kill themselves on purpose. The dry alcoholic will. These are the thoughts that go through our head when we're dry. They're the manifestations of a blocked spirit. And what happens when the spirit is blocked, just like the planet, like when the sun's blocked, it weakens and dies. I knew I suffered from, I didn't know the word bedevilments, but I couldn't buy into the idea, what worked for millions is going to work for me. Because in my mind, my misery and depression was worse than yours. And I wanted someone to say, oh, you'll be okay. I believe it could not be fixed. The steps won't work for me. See what else says here. When we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we could not, we had to stop doubting the power of God. That's some deep stuff. When we start to witness Rob and Ali and Billy and Kickin and Summer and Howard repair their lives, we start to believe this spiritual thing might possibly work. That's why books say like any of these are so important. We know why people drink. We know why people, do stuff bad. I don't want to sit through groups where I hear that stuff all the time. But the catch-22 is, for me is I was told to trust. Yeah, I need to trust in the same process as the first 100. I will get the same results stated, but my catch-22 was I didn't trust anybody. But here's where the truth hit me right in the face. Our ideas do not work, but the idea of God did. That's the truth hit me right square in the eyes. I couldn't ignore that. None of my ideas worked. And now I have this new idea of God that makes sense. Hope starts to build up in me. Because it wasn't my old idea of God. It was a new idea. It was just God within me. So I started to trust and to trust the program. Let's see what it says next. The Wright brothers, like here we go with the Wright brothers again. Almost childless faith that they could build a flying machine could fly. That's what no one else did, right? And no one else believed was the mainspring of their accomplishments. Without that, nothing could have happened. For me, when I finally believed I could have what others had, I took action towards that belief, and guess what? I got results. I had faith. Living this belief in action, beliefs to faith. To reach faith, we must take action. You can't sit and stare at the wall or fake it till you make it. Otherwise, all we have is a belief. I had a belief that I could, years ago, I had an insane idea that I went to my wife with, and I said, hey, we're not making lots of money or anything, that we could buy a house. She looked at me like I was nuts. Just no income, barely any income. Family and friends thought I was crazy. I said, give me 1 year and we'll have a house. And I came with this plan from a book and put the beliefs, my beliefs into action and following that plan. It grew to faith. So my wife started to believe as well. And then we had a house. And my brother and friends who thought I was crazy, who doubted me, went and got one too. And, I had a dream, I took action and got a result. What's your dreams? I just need action. Maybe the real question is, what are you resisting? One of my favorite quotes of all time is from Robert Kennedy. It's from actually George Bernard Shaw. wrote, made it famous. And I absolutely love it. It's on my wall. Some people see things as they are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. Start living life and go for it. Life's meant to be lived. I love this. I go off on this stuff, but I mean, I had a relative of mine as a Cherokee, and he told me his story. Um, and this is right when I got clean. He had 38 years of sobriety. Amazing guy. And told me a story. And I was I wasn't at a low point, but I was figuring this stuff all out. Just had a spiritual awakening, and he told the story of Custer's last stands. The Indians were totally outnumbered. And one of the Indians looked and turned to the other Indian and said, "It's a great day to die." And he said, "You know what that means? Make a great day to die." And I was like, "What?" And he said to me, "Do you want to die in fear and anger, all alone in some hole somewhere under the bridge you used to live in? Or do you want to, die free? Make your life great. Come into a way of life that works." When you do that, guess what? You find something worth dying for. And what you really found is what's living for. I mean, years ago, I had the sponsee come back and forth, back and forth. And I asked some questions at the top of my head, when you say something to a sponsee and you know where did that come from, you just know it came from God. I asked him, "Would you die for your kids?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah, of course." And I said, "How about living for your kids?" His mouth dropped. He wept. Big, giant guy. We need that for our lives. We need to live the life we intend to live. And that's why I said before, are you living life? Are you being lived? Are you living or just existing? Do you know who you are? Do you know what you want in life? What makes you fulfilled? So, because when I'm just existing, I'm just surviving. It's temporary happiness. But when you're living, think about that. Living life, you feel alive with every breath. You accomplish things effortlessly. Every day is a new discovery. You don't feel that hollow. You feel complete, whole. We stand on the fence. If you're on that fence, ask us the question, are you just existing or living? Don't miss out on this thing. I always say, don't miss out on this thing called life. Don't miss out. Something like I today, when someone has a terminal illness and they're saving up their money to go on all these trips and all these things, what do? They go on all those trips and all those things. My dad's one of the most upbeat, happiest person I've ever known. And he always told me, he goes, "Don't wait. Do the things you want to do now." Back to the book. We agnostics and atheists are sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency as human power would solve our problems. When others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them, we began to feel like those who insisted that Wright brothers could never fly. Remember those scientists and mathematicians, those preachers? They knew everything, and the plane flew, and they looked like fools. Closed-minded. Maybe you believe that, a second, and then your mind slams shut. There's a story I love that I grew up with, and I never really understood it until years ago. It was a story of Jesus walking on the water, and the disciples are sleeping on the boat, and Peter gets awoken by the lantern of the boat moving back and forth, and he realizes that there's this huge storm. And Peter, looks out and sees Jesus walking on the water. He says, "Master, is that you?" And Jesus says, "I am." Jesus comes, just come to me. Peter says, "I can't." Jesus says, "No, look at me. Come this way. Look at the light." Peter steps off the boat, and he takes a few steps, and he starts walking on water. And he starts to get startled, starts to sink. Jesus called down and says, "Look at me. Look at the light." And he starts walking again. But then the storm gets louder and lightning goes and he falls into the water. Sinks. You see, as soon as he took his eyes off the light, he started and got distracted by a problem, he sank. The problems dragged him down. Faith is simply taking the next step. You can't fear, you'll sink when you have faith. We have faith, you focus on the light, you walk. The same is true. Can't let fear sink you. Back to 53. Logic is great stuff. We like it. We still like it. It is not by chance we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses and draw conclusions. Examine your thinking, see what drives it. Draw your conclusions based on what you see. Trust it. See where it takes you. Maybe you'll fly. That is one of men's magnificent attributes. We agnostically inclined would feel satisfied with a proposal which does not. Oops, sorry. Sorry. Hence, we are at the pains to tell you why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it is more sane and logical to believe than not to believe, why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said, we don't know. When we became alcoholics, crushed by, look at this, underline this, self-imposed crisis. I look at self as misdirected instincts, right? It wasn't your upbringing, what people did to you, not anyone else's fault, not God's fault, self-imposed. I looked at those misdirected instincts, drove me to want to be fulfilled and things I could never have, or feel better when I had a resentment, or satisfied by harming someone. So the elimination of self was the goal. Back to the book. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fiercely face proposition. There's nothing fearful about facing fear. What makes you fearful is your thoughts about facing fear. Think about that. Facing fear eliminates fear, meaning when you face fear, it goes away. So we had to fiercely face proposition. Either God is everything, or else he's nothing. No middle ground there. Either one. God is everything. God is or isn't. What is your choice to be? Go to 59 real quick. It's going to tell us it says top majors avails nothing. And what we just read is this. We stood at the turning point. We ask his protection with complete care and abandon. This is the turning point right here. Either God is everything or else he's nothing. God either is or isn't. What is our choice to be? You have to be ready for that. Are you ready to make this choice that God is everything or nothing? God either is or isn't. Like I said, no middle ground there. No kind of, or, I'll get to it later. Some mistakes here people say, when seeking God, not say, but do, is they think they can fake it till they make it. So basically they're staying at the fork in the road. You seen the poster of the guy at the fork in the road where he's staying on the road and the fork goes off left to right? And they're going like this, God is, God isn't. And they stand there. They stand there and nothing changes. That's the middle of the road solution. Nothing changes, nothing changes. I was, when it came to understanding God, I was lost, I still don't understand God. The priests tried to explain it to me, nuns, parents. I tried to fake it till you make it. The only person that could explain God to me was my grandmother. And she's a very religious person, and her husband committed suicide 2 years before I was born. And she found Tai Chi, eventually found the Tao, and still practiced everything else religions there were. She was an amazing person. All my books at my office were hers, and including the book that was on top of the box that she gave to me. And she had no idea it was clean. Write your religious experiences. Um, but she had a very unique way to explain God, and I try to do it as good as I can. But she would explain when I was a kid. She liked to tell nursery stories to me, and she would teach me about the spirit within. And she used a story of Snow White, and the Wicked Witch says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest one of them all?" Mirror says, "Snow White." Snow White represents our spiritual nature within. Your spiritual nature can never be destroyed. So all the ego can do, which is the Wicked Witch, is put the spirit to sleep. So the Wicked Witch takes the poison apple, gives it to Snow White, she eats it, and goes into sleep, but does not die. Does not die. And who awakens Snow White? The Prince of Peace. It took me a long time to understand that story, but I understand it now that it's a kiss of higher consciousness that awakens us. So the question is whether God isn't. How could God not be? Because God is already within you. Maybe it's just asleep, or we are. Now, back to the book. Arrived at this point, we were scarcely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked over the bridge of reason to the shore of faith. And we're this shore, we're at the shore dying. We say, and we can stay there bleeding. We can cross this bridge of 429 and just see where it takes us. Excuse me. I think of what's the movie, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, where he gets inside or Last Crusade, I'm sorry, Last Crusade, and he's supposed to get to I forget what it was, Ark, not Dark, something else, but the map shows no bridge, but he knows it's there, and he takes a leap of faith, and the bridge appears. Because the map said so. He trusted the directions, and he took the faith, and boom. Perhaps it's your time to do the same. The outlines of the promise of a new land have brought luster and its glow to tired eyes, and fresh courage to weak spirits. Friendly hands have stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we've been leaning too heavy on reason. That was a lot. That last mile, we did not like to lose our support. Perhaps pyramid sink. That was that was natural, but let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, have we not been brought to where we stood by certain kind of faith? Very deep questions there. For did not we believe in our own reasoning? I'm right, you're wrong. Did not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but some sort of faith, but a sort of faith? Yes, we have been faithful, objectively faithful to the God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. We found too that we had been worshipers. What state of mental goose flesh that I love that, and that had used to bring on. We had to variously worship people, sentimental things, money, and ourselves. We worshiped everything: drugs, alcohol, sex. People say, I never worship people. I see, have you ever had a resentment? This next part in the book. And then with better motive, have we not worshiped, beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower? We step back and said, what made this? Who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much did these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Little or nothing. We saw it. We saw it last. Were not these things the tissue of which our lives were constructed? I mean, this stuff's so amazing because this is stuff we thought about when we were sitting alone. But not the exact same words, but we did this. We're alcoholics. We have deep thoughts. Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship in one form or another. We've been living faith and little else. Imagine life without faith, where nothing left but pure reason. It wouldn't be life. I mean, it's pretty deep. I mean, it would be like Groundhog Day, right? Same day over and over again. You know, when you live life, it's rich and beautiful. Every day is a new discovery. Back to the book. But we believed in life. Of course we did. We could not prove life in some sense that you prove a straight line in the shortest distance between 2 points, yet it was. Could we still say the whole thing had nothing but a mass of electrons creating out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling in the destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves seemed more intelligent than that. At least so the chemist said. Hence, we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dispensable, though it emit from our best minds. What about people who prove that man could never fly? You know, we covered, you know, the next part we covered this a few weeks ago, so I'm going to go to the bottom of 55. We already covered this. Since if you haven't learned when we did it, you can listen back, or it talked about God being within us. So I'm going to go to the bottom of 55. So we already covered this. In this book, you'll read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. This is Fritz Mayo, our Southern friend. You know, his story is so interesting. Well, let me talk about Fritz for a second. I mean, he grew up in just, I mean, to talk about it here, you know, it's family after family member were preachers. You know, he was the guy that argued with Bill Wilson over the writing of the Big Book. You know, he wanted all this stuff, and later on he changed his mind. He's the one that, you know, where we put in there, take that told Bill, you know, take this to your nearest to your preacher. He insisted it being in the book for your fifth step if you don't have somebody. Years later, Fritz changed his mind on that, in which he would never suggested that, because he realized something. The preachers weren't alcoholics. That's what Fritz said. But still, it says that his story is so interesting that some of us should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school where he became rebellious of what he thought was an overdose religious education. That's my experience. You know, I used to get in school in trouble in Catholic school because this one teacher who was a priest would always say, he asked us about God, he would say, it's a mystery, it's a mystery. And so one time he goes, Mr. Wood, where's your homework? I looked at him, I said, it's a mystery. So I used to get in trouble. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, and suicide. Does that sound familiar? These calamities and an immediate family embedded depressed him. Post-war disillusionment, even more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction. So, I mean, look at Fritz for a second here. Failure, insanity, suicide, and, you know, embitterment, depression, disillusionment, alcoholism, physical collapse, self-destruction. You know, you see why there's a spiritual penance in this book, is we can honestly face our problems, not problem, we can recover. The program of problems, we are fixated on the problem that got us in the door. And they award us for how much time we get. They never look at the problems that, that fear sinks us, so to speak. One night, while confined in the hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. Our friend's gorgeous anger rose with bitter as he bitterly cried out, "If there's a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me." Hmm. The question I would ask people is, you ever say that? He's not suffering from separation from God. People will say that there. He's suffering from the illusion of separation from God. Because you can never be separated from God, because it's already within you. You're blocked, or should we say asleep, right? But later on, alone in his room, he asked himself this question. One of those questions come to mind. Is it possible that all religious people I know have been wrong? While pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, sudden profound, a great thought came over him. Crowd all the thoughts. Who you say there is no God? Wow. It's very powerful right there. That's prophesizing. That's when the words come to you. The obsession is described as a thought that crowds all the thoughts. This thought overpowered all his mind. Who are you to say there is no God? Who on this planet has never worshipped something, like I said earlier, maybe it's happiness, peace. Most people looking for God never call it God. Think about that. You can't point fingers at someone. They're looking for peace and love. They just don't call it God. This man recounts that he tumbled out of his bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by the conviction of the presence of God. Have any of you felt that before? If you get all the way, get your crap out of the way, God will come to you. Always works that way. That's why I say these stuffs are very divinely written. It poured over and through him with a certainty of a majesty of a great tide of flood. The barriers he had built through the years were swept away. All the other ideas were shattered because he let them all go. Right? Remember in Bill's story where he said, "The moment I fully accepted him, the feeling was electric. The effect was electric." I think it says in Fred's story, the moment I made up my mind to go through with it, the process, that curious conviction, his alcohol condition was gone. This man thought he was an atheist, was triggered by the question, who are you to say there is no God? We all have a launching point. What's your launching point? When you're desperate and dying, be careful what you ask for. You just might get it. My grandma used to have an old saying, there's no atheists in foxholes. I think it says here, it says he stood at the presence of infinite, that means unlimited, power and love. I mean, who wouldn't want that? He stepped from the bridge of reason. I'm sorry, from bridge to shore. So the bridge of reason to shore of faith. For me, it happened in step 6 when I let go of all these old ideas. And changed my point of view, so to speak. And I experienced God. And I knew God was real. For the first time, he lived in constant companionship with his creator. I wish everyone could experience that right there. It's so beautiful. It's not something you can tell another what it's like or what it's going to taste like. Or remember I told about the mango story. There's an old saying. It's really old. Those who know do not tell. Those who tell do not know. Thus, our friend's cornerstone was fixed in place. Second step. He still has to do, 3, 4, 5, 6, through 12, whatever. No later vesicle has shaken it. Nothing could shake it. His alcoholic problem was taken away. That very night, years ago, it disappeared. Save for a few moments of brief temptation, the thought of drinking had never returned. And at such times, a great revulsion has risen in him. I remember I read that and I go, that's impossible. But it did happen to me. Seemingly he could not drink, even if he could. God had restored his sanity. I mean, this is beautiful. When you're under God's protection, that one is with God, there are no words. What is this but a miracle of healing? Wow. You know, part of the miracle of healing is, I remember my grandma explained it to me too, and she said, did Jesus actually heal a blind man? Actually, I asked my grandma, sarcastic, did Jesus actually heal a blind man? And my grandma looked at me and she says, no, he made the man believe he could heal himself. That's, I was like, what? No, I never heard anyone say it before. What is the miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his maker, and then he knew. Went from belief to knowing, from atheist to knowing. That's a jump. Where else can that happen? Not very many places. How many of us have witnessed that right in front of us happen? How many people say, oh, I don't need a sponsor? And you're saying, I don't want to witness something like that or have someone have it happen to them. So it says here, even so, God restores all to right minds. For this man's revelation was sudden spiritual experience. Some of us are more slowly spiritual awakening. Sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly. Here is a beautiful promise that this has to be experienced. But he has come to all that's promise. That's a promise, and here's the condition: who honestly sought him. This is, the word of this chapter is seek, 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 action, action, action. Seek. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. I mean, God reveals himself to us when we let go of old ideas. When we let go. Remember what said earlier in the book, what seems a flimsy reed is proven to be a loving, powerful hand of God. Of course, I'm going to close with a really cool story. This is a good one. Okay, so there's this man who's lost in the desert. He's wandering around for days, dying of dehydration, and he keeps seeing, mirages, and he sees a shack in the distance. And he's not sure if it's a mirage, but I'm going to go anyways. He's desperate. And when he arrives at the shack, he discovers a water pump inside the shack. And he instantly just jumps in the water shack and the pump starts pumping it. Nothing comes out. Frustrated and tired, collapses to the floor, weeping. This is where I die, he says. And while lying on the floor, he sees 6 empty water jugs. And next to the water jugs is another jug filled with water. But there's a note: pour the water into the top of the pump to prime it, and if you do this, you will have all the water you need to live and survive. But please don't forget to fill the bottle when you're done. So our friend is sitting there and he's got a dilemma. Should I follow these insane instructions and trust the note and pour all the water into the pump and have all the water you need to survive, or I just grab that jug, and I'll be good again, survive the night? Thought, he's like, shouldn't, I mean, it's a risk. I mean, if I pour all the water into the pump, it might be the last water I ever see. And what if the pump doesn't work? Maybe the note's incorrect. Maybe this person's insane. Maybe it's all a lie. But then the man sat there. Who am I to disbelieve? And he decided to take a leap of faith, and his hands are shaking. With his last bit of strength, he pours the water into the pump, closes his eyes, and prays, and starts pumping. And at first, nothing happens. And he got scared, and he kept pumping. And all of a sudden, this loud gurgling sound comes out, and water starts gushing. He lays under that pump for like 15 minutes, water just pouring out. He drank his more refreshing than he's ever had, and he filled the six empty jugs. And he then, as he's filling those jugs, he goes to walk out, in the back of the door, there's a map, and he sees that the civilization, those empty jugs, is just the amount of water he needs to live. And he fills up the original bottle, puts a cork in it. On the original note, he picked up a pencil and wrote a brand new line: believe. It works. See, many of us have faced situations like that, where we have two oppositions, life or death, where there is doubt and uncertainty. God is or isn't. New life. Would it work? Do we seek power, or do we take the easy way out? Back to death, cycle drinking, drink. Remember, it says if you doom to alcoholic death and live on a spiritual basis, not easy alternatives to face. Do we take the easy way out? Or do we take the harder road of seeking God? We made that choice to seek the power, and soon after much, we discovered faith. It is then we are inspired by it, and we tell others, believe it works. So next week, we're going to talk about it works, called How It Works. I'm going to stop the recording.